It has been a long time since my last devlog. First, my editing software subscription expired, then I got busy with school, then I was out of school but the Switch 2 is out and I happened to get one on launch day. Now I'm back in school, and so, needless to say, I've been very busy, and on top of everything, I've just been genuinely procrastinating working on this game. However, I do really like making this project, so I decided to lock in and really put my nose to the grindstone on this project. In this episode, we are taking down the 3 remaining Robot Masters, Bubble Man, Airman, and Quick Man, alongside the enemies and gimmicks pertaining to each of their stages. So let's not waste any more time, and get started! Bubble Man is probably the main reason that I procrastinated on this project, because I personally find his stage really boring and tedious. So looking at footage or playing through his level in order to analyze enemy placements and behaviors was a challenge for me. As you saw in last devlog's teaser, I had finished porting over the entire layout of this stage already, but when it came time to add in enemies, I really struggled. I finished implementing the ones that I thought would be simplest, being the frog-spewing Gedog enemies and Crabbots, which walk back and forth on a single platform, losing their shell when hit, and that was it for a while. This was when I got bored and started trying to endlessly develop and scrap and develop and scrap a new original game to upload, and I did finish an entire game using my 3D engine made in TerraWarp. Feel free to check it out if you're interested. There's no download, it's all in browser, and I'd really appreciate feedback. But eventually I was scrolling through YouTube and came across this fan remake of Mega Man 4, 5, and 6 called The Sequel Wars, based off the Wily Wars, which was an actual official remake for the Sega Genesis released in 1994. I downloaded it for my 3DS and oh my gosh, Mega Man The Sequel Wars is absolutely incredible. If you love Mega Man, in particular 4, 5, and 6, the latter half of the NES Sixology, whatever you call a series of 6 games, I highly recommend checking it out. The level of detail and care put into remaking these stages and the music, everything just makes the game feel incredible, and it gave me a ton of inspiration to work on this Mega Man port. So when I came back, I really focused and I started tackling the big enemies I was avoiding, the Shrink and Anko. Shrink isn't that troublesome, he just slowly glides down and occasionally boosts forward towards you. However, Ankos are another one of the big enemies in Mega Man 2, like the Hot Dog and Woodman stage. They are large unmoving anglerfish that spawn shrinks, and they were tricky because, well, obviously not only do they spawn other enemies, but they also only spawn 2 shrink at a time. Luckily, I had already came up with a solution to this when I was making the Kedog enemies, since they similarly only shoot when there is no more petite Kerogs on the stage. To tackle these issues, I made a enemy shots variable, which is global. Before Kerog shoots out its petite frogs, it checks if this value is set to 0, which it is each time a room is loaded, and if it is, it shoots out the enemies and sets the variable to 3. Each time that a petite Kerog is destroyed or despawns from going off screen, this value is decremented by 1, meaning when all 3 petite Kerogs are eliminated, the Kerog will shoot out another batch because the value is set back to 0. Originally, I was just going to make it so as soon as the Shrink enemy is initialized, it would increase the enemy shots variable by 1, but I soon realized that this meant that Shrink enemies that were farther up in the level would also increment this value, meaning the Ankos wouldn't shoot out any Shrinks until every last one in this room was killed, some of which could be past the Ankos, and because they have a really big barrier that damages the player when trying to cross it, this would pretty much softlock you. However, if I only increment the value when the Ankos spat out the enemies, that would mean that killing an unrelated Shrink would make the enemy shots variable also go down, meaning it could get into the negatives, and that would mean that it would shoot out even more than 2 enemies at a time, so I needed to figure out something else. Luckily, a saving grace reappeared from this project's past, the hash variable. In case you didn't watch the previous episodes, or just freaking forgot, the hash variable is a local variable that almost everything has. The player, enemies, bosses, even the tiles that make it to the level have this variable. It doesn't have one specific use, but rather can be used for many different mathematical or logical operations in order to keep track of any arbitrary value. In the case of the Shrink enemy, they don't use it at all, but this meant that I could reserve the variable to mean whether this was a natural Shrink or one created by the Ankos, since the hash variable is inherited from the Anko. So when a Shrink is defeated, it checks if its hash variable is higher than 0, and if it is, then it decreases enemy shots by 1, and then we can just regularly increase enemy shots whenever firing out from the Anko enemy. Hooray! Problem solved! After Shurikenenko, there were only 2 enemies remaining, and they were both constantly spawning enemies that are triggered by these event blocks that I talked about in one of the previous episodes. They also both fall from the top of the screen. One is M44-5, which I only found out just now that it's supposed to be a mini version of this Mega Man 1 boss, CW01P, which, yeah, that makes sense. They fall down slowly and then start moving towards Mega Man in a wave pattern, which isn't too interesting to program. You can look at the code right here. And the other enemy are these claw robot enemies that fall down, bounce twice on the ground, and then just start walking towards Mega Man. They don't even turn around to chase after him. They're nice and easy to make. We'll cover the actual boss robot masters after we cover their stages, so let's move on to the Airman stage. This stage is a very particular special feature that no other level in the game has, and that is the fact that on this stage, all the tiles that make up the level get rendered on top of the player and enemy sprites, not beneath them like in every other level. This was actually pretty easy to do. I already have this rendering of the screen separated into layers because Scratch's sprite layering is a nightmare to work with if you have anything more than like 10 sprites active at once. This means that all it took for me to make the sprites go behind the level is to literally just rearrange the order of these broadcast blocks. Other than that, Airman stage is not too tough to implement. There are these giant enemies that act as platforms called goblins, and they're certainly interesting, but not that difficult to program. The hardest part was making them shoot out these smaller versions of themselves called petite goblins, but even then, their movement pattern could just be copied over from the tellies from Crashman's and Heatman stages. You would think that the fan fiends would be hard to implement, considering they're able to push Mega Man around, but it was actually really simple. I just created a new global variable called wind, and I just handle it in the same step as the moving platform code, since they both involve forcing Mega Man to move in an arbitrary motion every single frame. The one that was most difficult was the Lightning Lord enemy. It's basically Lackey 2 for Mario, but his cloud is a platform instead of a power-up, and his projectiles don't turn to enemies upon hitting the ground. Phew! That one was quick to run through. And speaking of quick, did you guys see the new Sonic Racing game? It looks so cool, with all the courses and the power-ups and Miku. Huh. Anyways, in case you couldn't tell, that was my transition to talking about the Quickman stage. Funnily enough, Quickman was originally going to be the second level I ever implemented after Metal Man because I thought the lasers would be hard to implement and I wanted to get them out of the way. However, I eventually realized that it would be better to make them in the order that they appear from, bottom left going to the right, then up and back to the left, and then doing that all the way up to the top, because then I could easily translate their levels into indexes from the stage select. But this meant that Quickman got pushed all the way back to the final level implemented, which is kind of funny. The Quickman stage is probably the most vertical level of all the Robot Master stages, which means that it took up the most level indexes in game, since rooms are designed to be more horizontal rather than vertical. It also has these very complicated patterns that make up the background of the stage, so implementing it rivaled Flashman in terms of how difficult it was to copy over the layout exactly. On top of this, Quickman stage introduced 2 new gimmicks that you've likely already spotted in the B-roll, and one of which I already mentioned, and those are the Force Beams and the Dark sections. Force Beams appear throughout the entire stage, and they also appear first, so I decided to implement them before implementing the Dark sections. They're pretty much just an entity that travels from one edge of the screen to the other, leaving behind a long trail of insta-kill tiles behind it, or well, at least that's how I implemented them. I just implemented a new tile that has the same shape as spikes. Remember how I have a list named tile shapes that doesn't actually mean what the shape of a tile is, it more so means its properties. Yeah, there's a spike property, and so I made a tile with the spike property that looks like a laser beam. Then when these travel across the screen, they place these on the background, creating a whole beam of insta-kill lasers. The Dark Rooms, however, were slightly more interesting to implement, which is kind of funny considering that the Dark Rooms kind of only appear once in the entire game. Anyways, the way I did this was by creating a brand new global variable called Darkness, and I made a new event object that, when triggered, causes the base entity sprite to count this variable upwards, which the tile sprites then use to fade out. Yes, fade out. They don't get darker, they fade away, and like you see the black backdrop that is behind the stage. In fact, if I just change the backdrop and then activate this, yeah. There's one more entity that I needed to create for this stage, and that was the Chanky Maker, or Tackle Fire Maker. They have a very basic behavior of just throwing out fireballs at Mega Man, but their main gimmick is that they temporarily light up the stage while they are on the screen. This was just done by overriding the darkness variable with this enemy's frame variable, which is initialized to 0 and constantly counts up while they are active. Wow, we really blazed by the stages this time, huh? And no, I'm not gonna do another stupid edit. But yeah, I guess it's time to talk about the Robot Masters now, alongside the weapons they give you, of course. Bubble-Man has a truly unnecessarily intricate movement pattern. He, alongside Woodman, are the only bosses that have 2 separate projectiles that need to make for them. In his first phase, he shoots out 3 bouncing bubbles at you, and timing them exactly so that the one in the middle bounces and hits the ground right as the other 2 are in their apex. That way they create this sort of pattern where the first and last bubble line up with each other, meanwhile the middle bubble is bouncing opposite to them. Immediately after launching the 3rd bubble, however, he moves into his second phase, where he swims upward and simultaneously towards your horizontal position. While he is doing this, he will fire small shots at you whenever you cross a horizontal line going across his body. This makes his fight pretty much just threading 1,000 different needles at once, but he's really weak to most weapons, so he's not too difficult to damage boost through. His weapon, Bubble Lead, is pretty simple too. It's just a projectile that rolls along the ground, and if it's not on solid ground, it falls straight down, before continuing if it hits solid ground again. Airman's battle is infamously impossible, mostly because his attack pattern is just plain stupid. He shoots out 6 small tornadoes towards random positions and then blows them towards you while also pushing you away from him. He does this 2 more times for a total of 3 before jumping towards the other side, via 1 short hop and 1 ridiculously high jump. He then turns around and repeats the pattern. He never even faces towards you, he just statically flips around each time he gets to the other side of the room. This means most players either find him totally unfair or just dumb. Airman's weapon is also pretty dumb. It fires out 3 of the small tornadoes and they quickly flow upwards while spreading out. It is useful, however, for dealing high amounts of damage to single enemies, as all 3 projectiles are able to hit the enemy at once. Quickman is also famously hard, but this time in the original game it was no joke because his AI was legitimately broken. I would recommend you watch Displaced Gamer's video on this, but in short, when running, Quickman would get stuck in the wall, so when he would jump, the game would detect he was in a wall and think that it meant he had already landed from a jump. He's supposed to jump 3 times at random heights, short to get close to Mega Man, middle to jump over Mega Man, and high to land right on Mega Man, hopefully damaging him by colliding with him. After these 3 jumps, he will run straight forward for a couple of seconds before repeating the pattern. During the apex of the second jump, he will also throw 3 boomerangs aimed at Mega Man. After crossing his position, they stop for a second and then re-aim themselves towards Mega Man's new position and fire off again. Now, here I chose to actively use his original intended AI instead of recreating the broken AI used in the original game. Y'all can discuss this in the comments, and maybe if you can convince me, I'll switch to the accurate broken AI, but otherwise, I'm sticking with this one. Quickman's AI is the Quick Boomerang, which is just a sped up version of the cutter from Mega Man 1. Really 0 for 3 with these weapons, huh? Aha! But we have one final weapon left to implement, and it's... oh, come on, item 3? The stupid bouncing platform that climbs up walls? The item you only ever use because the other 2 are out of ammo? Wow, what a way to end this episode on a low note. Dr. Wily, but you're not supposed to be here yet. We're gonna talk about your levels in the next episode. Huh? What do you mean that's just your castle? You don't have any stages other than your castle in Mega Man 2. What's your game? You'll show me. Show me what? That's right, the fun doesn't stop there. There will be 3 additional stages in my Mega Man 2 Scratch version. Now, I know some of you will be concerned about, well, you take so long to upload a video when you're remaking the game, how long will it take you to make something original? But if y'all have stuck around my devlogs all the way to the end, in fact, in my very first devlog at the very end, I'd already shown you guys that I did make a completely original boss, Fake Mega Man. Well, the boss fight is original, the character is from the Mega Man 1 remake Mega Man Powered Up, but still, these stages are more so a way to keep me motivated with actual level design compared to the copy and paste nature of me remaking the original levels. Also, these levels are going to reuse tiles from the original game. They're not going to have any original level art, so they won't be super hard, it'll just be the level design. I plan on them either appearing after you've already beaten the base Mega Man 2 game, or possibly in between the Robot Masters and Wily Castle, like the Dock Robot stages in Mega Man 3. Let me know in the comments which you think would work better. For now, I'm probably going to put them in between. Oh, and if you're wondering who you're going to fight at the end of these stages, well, let's just say there will be some killer robots, and Mega Man is definitely going to need some extra lives, because he's going to die. But yeah, hopefully you guys are excited about the new stages and bosses. I personally cannot wait for you guys to try them out. I think I'm actually not going to talk about them in any future devlogs or show any footage because I want you guys to experience it on your own when the game comes out. So yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm so glad that you guys keep watching these videos. I'm so thankful for your support. Subscribe so you won't miss out when the devlog featuring Wily Castle shows up, and so that you know when the game drops. So yeah, thanks for watching, and goodbye.